Overwatch 2, it's actually happening. I mean, the leaks have been out all week, but I just thought they were gonna be fake leaks and we weren't actually getting it, but looks like Overwatch 2 is happening, so that's awesome. And because the rumors have been circulating all week about this being a possibility, it got me thinking about the fact that I haven't done an Overwatch-focused character redesign episode, I think since that Overwatch characters as dinosaurs from almost a year ago, which is ridiculous because I've become a way better artist since then, and I absolutely love the character design in this game. So I really wanted to do an Overwatch-focused episode, and I thought, because I'm in a really fantasy-focused mindset right now, both because I'm starting work on a fantasy comic, and because this month's Popcross Community Redraw theme is Dungeons & Dragons, I thought, hey, what would Overwatch characters look like if they were in Dungeons & Dragons? So, in today's episode, we're gonna find out. Okay, now obviously there's a ton of awesome characters in Overwatch that would be super cool to D&Dify, and I've got a few more complicated ideas, but I think the first one that came to my mind is a good, fun, kind of simple premise to start with. So I'm gonna start with our boy, Soldier 76. Alright, the first thing that had come to my mind with Soldier 76 was just making him a knight, a fighter kind of character. Because he's your classic soldier type in Overwatch, I thought just a classic knight. But thinking about his story in Overwatch and where he is at the time that the game takes place, it didn't really make too much sense, so I decided to go with a ranger version of him, because I came up with the story in my head that's very similar to his story in the actual Overwatch lore, where in this version, he was the leader of the Queen's Guard or King's Guard in some kind of ruling nation. Like, he was the head honcho knight, and then another nation came in and overtook them. It beat them in a war, and he doesn't agree with the new nation's rule. So he went off to fight on his own, stopped being a part of the guard, and became a sort of rebellious ranger vigilante type. So he has a reason to put on a mask, and he fights on the outskirts of civilization. And that's kind of what a ranger's purpose is. So he's a little bit, I guess he's got a little bit of rogue inspiration as well, but I just liked the ranger idea, and looking at images of other people's ranger designs, I really liked a lot of the stuff. This version takes a little bit of inspiration from Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, and even a little bit of Jon Snow. Would he be a ranger? I don't know, but anyway, I took a little bit of inspiration from that on the fur around the neck and on the lower part of his, I was going to call it a front cape. I don't know what it's called, but anyway, you can see the furry bits lower down as well. The character ends up looking a little bit like Kylo Ren or even Connor from Assassin's Creed 3, but that wasn't really intentional. I don't mind it so much. The Kylo Ren part wasn't obviously as ideal because that's a sci-fi character, and I'd even later on considered adding a bit of glow to the eyes behind the mask because, you know, Soldier 76, part of his iconic look is kind of that glowing red visor. But I didn't end up going with that. I messed around with it after the screen recording and didn't keep it. It just didn't really work, made it feel a little bit too sci-fi and leaned it more towards looking like Kylo Ren, which I didn't really want. But besides that, I really love how this one turned out. I ended up giving him not quite a long sword, not quite a short sword. I couldn't really decide, so I kind of went halfway in between. I figured if he was a part of a Queen's Guard or King's Guard, he would have been using a long sword, but Rangers tend to be more short sword, so I was umming and ahhing and didn't really end up making a definitive decision. And then, because Rangers often have a bow, slung that over his shoulder, and overall, I really like this one. I like the rendering on it. I think the red background that I used to give a little bit of rim lighting behind him makes him really pop out, and yeah, I was really happy with this one, and I hope you all like it too. So here he is, our Ranger 76. Okay, next up, I've got an idea that might be a little bit out there, but I really like the idea, so I'm gonna try it out. Bastien. This could be good, could be bad. We'll see how it turns out. Alright, now for Bastien, originally I'd thought of making him an enchanted armor, because I don't know if this is just me, but I picture enchanted armors as kind of being like the Dungeons & Dragons equivalent of a robot. But I decided I wanted to push it a little bit more. I wanted to make him a sort of, not human character, but a fleshy character. No, that's a weird way to, a biological character. So what I decided to do was make him a Cyclops barbarian, or at least a character that had been a barbarian. I picture him as being a very naturally peaceful character, but who was raised in a tribe of barbarians. So he goes and fights with them in a battle, and he gets knocked out. And he's wounded enough that they think he's dead, so they don't carry him off with the wounded, but he eventually comes to and is alive. I pictured him having amnesia, and I know that's a little bit of a cheap story element, but I figured it's kind of like what happens to Bastien in the actual Overwatch game, so I went with it, and I just pictured, now that he's been knocked out, he's separated from his tribe, he doesn't remember what his life is, now he can be his natural, peaceful self, he starts falling in love with nature, and so I pictured him transitioning from being a barbarian type to being a sort of druid monk. I was thinking more along the lines of a monk, and I was taking more visual inspiration from how monks tend to look in Dungeons & Dragons, but because in Overwatch he's a character who comes to fall in love with nature, I thought druid might be a good idea. I don't take too many cues from druid visuals, except maybe I've got that big tree trunk slung over his back. That was supposed to kind of be the visual equivalent of the cannon that Bastien has on his back. So the druid thing doesn't necessarily come through, but I like the idea of this character going from being a barbarian to something else. And maybe he's not even necessarily becoming a monk, but he's living with a tribe of monks and just doing chores around where they live. And I just picture him being a lot happier this way, not necessarily fighting as much. I mean, he could still do some fighting. I gave him a hammer that is actually Bastien's head, but just as a hammer, and I thought that was kind of fun and cute. And obviously, the reason I made him a Cyclops is so he could have the one big blue eye like Bastien has. And I drew him in pretty much the same pose as the reference image I had up, except I put the bird sitting on his big, chunky pinky, because he's a big, brooding Cyclops. He'd have, all his fingers would be really big. And I thought that was kind of cute and fun and dainty. And yeah, really happy with this one too. So I don't know if the name I came up with is so great, but anyway, here it is. Gotta give a big shout out to ABD Illustrates, whose Disney and Dragons episodes, turning Disney princesses and villains into Dungeons & Dragons versions of themselves, was a huge inspiration for these videos. I'll link it in the description below. Super cool stuff. Also, if you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. Really helps boost it up through the algorithm and encourages me to do a sequel, if you want that sort of thing. Okay, sorry for the interruption, back to drawing. Next up, we've got, perfect. Tracer. I mean, we couldn't not do Tracer in this episode, right? Let's do it. Okay, so for Tracer, I'd originally been a little bit more visual inspired than story inspired. With Bastien and Soldier 76, I was thinking about the story more and then coming up with the drawing. With this one, I didn't take that approach so much, but as I was doing the drawing, I had Tracer's lore open on my other monitor, and I was getting some ideas for this character's story that I really liked. I kept it pretty similar to Tracer's Overwatch story, but basically, I thought of Tracer, this version of her, being an elf fighter who gets cursed. And the curse, she is falling in and out of time, disappearing for months or even a year at a time sometimes, which is similar to what happens to Tracer in the actual Overwatch lore, except it's an experiment, not a curse. And then friends of this version of Tracer, an artificer, which is the Dungeons & Dragons equivalent of an inventor, and a wizard get together and make this device that can stop her from falling in and out of time as long as she's wearing it. So it doesn't break the curse, but it keeps her in our time. And it's that diamond thing I put on her chest that's both the visual equivalent of her chronal accelerator and obviously serves the same purpose as that. But then I picture this character kind of falling in love with the time travel ability. Despite it being a curse, she ends up seeing it as a possible gift and starts learning magic to try and figure out how to use it to her advantage. For visual cues, I was kind of going with rogue a little bit, and that doesn't necessarily line up with the story I just came up with. She would have to kind of shift her attitude a little bit from, because if she was a fighter, I don't quite have a good reason she ended up becoming a rogue. Something in that story could push her from fighter to rogue, but visually I just really like the idea of having these two kind of weird shaped daggers and being a little bit scrappier looking. The main part of this visual that I don't love is her gloves. I think I made them a bit too big and not very interesting looking, but I also had her doing that dash like she can do in Overwatch, and I picture this as her having learned some magic stuff so she can control her time travel curse. So I don't know, it's not quite as fleshed out of a story as some of the other ones, but I really liked it. I like the look, I like drawing the face, because Tracer's got such a great face design, so that was really fun to draw. And because she's got kind of pointy-ish features, that was the main reason I made her an elf. There wasn't really much story reason behind it, which obviously isn't necessarily great from a storytelling perspective, but I think visually it worked really well. Those streaks on her face, again, I don't know why I put them there. I just really liked them, and overall, even though the story's not as fleshed out, I really love how this one turned out. And then I just gave her a classic elf kind of name. So, here she is. Okay. Now to finish off, we've got to do my personal favorite Overwatch character to play as, Pharah reporting. For Pharah, because she's my favorite Overwatch character, I had to do something really cool that I really liked. And I mean, I always play as Pharah because I'm generally pretty bad at video games despite loving them, so I can just kind of fly above everyone and shoot down. I know it's cheap, but it's fun to do. I never play competitive. Anyway, I really wanted to keep flying as an element for this character, so I decided to make her Dragonborn. And I know Dragonborn characters generally don't have wings or a tail. So what I decided was, in coming up with the story for this character, I figured she would be born with wings and just people see it as a natural gift, just an anomaly. And she doesn't take it for granted. She uses those wings and trains to be an absolutely phenomenal fighter with the intention of joining the Queen's Guard. And this is how I kind of mix her in with my Ranger 76 story, where she wants to join the guard that he's a part of. But then when the new kingdom comes in and takes over, she isn't really interested in joining anymore, and she's just gotten to the age where she could join, so she instead goes and becomes security. And I was thinking I could even make her the security guard for the artificer that gave Tracer her device that keeps her in time. So I'm kind of mixing a bunch of the stories together, and I thought that was kind of fun. It was a little bit last minute, and I have to find a more seamless way to work them all together, but I thought it was a fun idea. And in terms of the design of this character, I really love drawing Dragonborns. I used to have a Dragonborn D&D character myself that I played as a while back. I think that story just ended up fizzling out. We didn't really wrap it up. But anyway, I love Dragonborns. I know giving it wings is kind of cheating, but I think it was such a nice element to the character and worked in with the story. And I also love drawing wings just from a visual standpoint, because they're such a good way to naturally frame a character. In this, I kind of cheat the lighting a little bit. One of the wings that's in front of her would be casting more of a shadow on her with where I did the shading on the rest of her body, but I don't think it's too big of a problem. I don't think it really affects the piece that much. If you're not thinking about it, you probably wouldn't notice. My only actual problem with this is probably that I made her armor a little bit too shiny. For a fantasy D&D character, I feel like it should be a little bit duller looking, but I just love the bright, vibrant blue on Pharah. Felt like I should keep it, so I kept it in there. Also, I drew the background and ground elements in after the fact, after the recording, and yeah, I'm really happy with this one too. I've just been really happy with this whole video, so here's our Pharah as a Dragonborn. Okay, I know I say this a lot on here, but this is genuinely some of my favorite art I've made on the channel in ages. I think these turned out so cool, so I really hope this video does well to justify doing a follow-up, because I'd love to take more Overwatch characters and draw their D&D versions. So if you've got suggestions for Overwatch characters that you think would make a cool specific class or race from D&D, leave it in the description below. I'd love to see people's suggestions. Or if there's any other video game or pop culture thing that you'd like to see turned into something else. I love hearing people's suggestions and just doing these kinds of videos in general. The Pokemon as superheroes ones are probably the most popular, but I love doing a whole bunch of different weird versions of these. I got a playlist full of them. Anyway, I'm Christian Pearson. This has been Popcross Studios, home of the nerdiest art videos on YouTube, If you want to submit something for a monthly community redraw, the instructions for how are in the description below. And that's all for this episode. Have I said thanks for watching? I might not have. So thanks for watching, everybody. Goodbye.